Chapter 24. The Journey Back. As John embarked on his journey back through the jungle, he could feel the weight of the decision he had made. The jungle was alive with the sounds of the wildlife, but it was not the same without the team by his side. It felt as if the jungle was filled with 1,000 goodbyes. The trees loomed over him, casting the long shadows in the fading light. John's mind was preoccupied with thoughts of his dream and the message it held for him. He was reminded of the giant and the battle that had taken place. It felt like a lifetime ago, but the memory was still vivid in his mind. As he walked, John felt the weight of his backpack with his personal belongings and the few souvenirs he had collected from the tribes. The path ahead was long and winding, but John remained determined to make it to the airport in good time. The further he walked, the more John began to realize the impact that his time in the jungle had on him. He was different from the man who had arrived months earlier. The jungle had taught him so much about life and about himself. He felt a deep sense of gratitude for the experiences he had and the people he had met. Despite the challenging journey, John walked with a newfound sense of purpose. He was determined to continue his work and share the love of God with others. As he moved forward, the memories of his time in the jungle would stay with him forever. As John made his way back towards civilization, he walked along long stretches of winding road with no sign of any vehicles passing by. The hot sun beat down on him, and sweat trickled down his face and neck. I should have brought more water. His throat felt like an overbaked cracked cookie. Maybe I should have let David come. As the hours ticked by, he grew more and more desperate for a ride. His backpack began to feel like it was full of baubles. He felt like he had been walking for days, although it had only been a few hours. His eyes were like searchlights, seeking any sign of a car or truck, but the road was quiet. Finally, he saw a dust cloud rising in the distance, and his heart lifted with hope. As the vehicle approached, he saw that it was an old pickup truck, driven by a friendly-looking local man. John quickly stuck out his thumb, hoping the driver would stop and give him a lift. The truck slowed to a stop, and the driver motioned for John to climb in. John gratefully climbed into the passenger seat. They chatted amiably as they drove along, and John felt grateful for the lift. Despite the discomfort of the bumpy ride, John couldn't help but feel a sense of wonder at the beauty of the jungle surrounding him. The vibrant green of the leaves, the chorus of birds and insects, and the occasional glimpse of a colorful butterfly all reminded him of the incredible diversity and richness of God's creation. As they neared the airport, John thanked the driver for the ride and said goodbye. He felt a pang of sadness as he watched the truck drive away, realizing that this part of his journey was over. But he also felt a sense of excitement at the thought of returning to his home country and to the new adventures that lay ahead. John walked through the airport, his backpack slung over one shoulder as he made his way to the lockers. He inserted the key and turned it, hearing the satisfying click of the lock releasing. He pulled open the metal door and saw the package, still wrapped in its brown paper, sitting inside. His heart raced as he picked up the package, feeling its weight in his hand. As John opened the package and saw the treasure, he realized the difficult position he was in. He knew the team couldn't keep the treasure, but he also couldn't risk telling the wrong people about it. He was afraid that if the treasure's existence became known, it could seriously disrupt the lives of the locals. John carefully placed the treasure back in the box and wrapped it up in the brown paper. He decided to leave it in the locker. That was a problem for another time. He closed the locker door and took a deep breath. As John sat in the airport terminal, waiting for his flight to board, he was lost in thought. As he boarded the plane, he took a deep breath and focused on the flight ahead. As he settled into his seat, he noticed that the person next to him was speaking in a dialect that sounded similar to the ones he had heard in the villages he had visited. Intrigued, he struck up a conversation. "Excuse me," John began. "I couldn't help but overhear your conversation. Is that language you're speaking similar to the ones spoken by the tribes around the Wildwood of Souls?" The person smiled easily. "Yes. You have good ear. I from tribe in north. We. More. Civilized. That's fascinating, John said. I've spent the past few months working with tribes in the region as a missionary. It's been a life-changing experience. The person nodded, looking interested. I can imagine. I'm a teacher myself, and I work with my tribe to preserve our culture and language. It's important to us to pass it on to the next generation. As the flight took off, John and the person continued to talk, sharing stories and experiences. John found it comforting to speak to someone who knew the area, sort of. Yet he recognized as always that missing element, the Spirit of Jesus. In such company, John's heart felt as though it had been jettisoned into the vast emptiness of space, surrounded by the cold darkness of a spiritual void. He could see the emptiness in the person's eyes like the desolate craters of a barren planet. But as John spoke, his words were like the warm rays of the sun, gently shining down and bringing life to a barren landscape. John shared stories of the jungle, like the swirling storms of a hurricane, bringing with it the incredible love of Jesus that was like a beacon of light cutting through the darkness. He spoke of hope and peace, like the calm after a storm, where the sound of a gentle stream could be heard, bringing serenity and tranquility to the weary. I was on a mission to help these tribes learn about God and the love of Christ, John said. But it wasn't easy. They had their own beliefs and were initially resistant to hearing about Jesus. The person next to John looked intrigued and asked, "So, what changed their minds? What made them turn to Jesus?" John took a deep breath and continued, "It wasn't anything I did, but rather the work of the Holy Spirit. Sometimes I dream of what we needed to know about their culture to reach them. Over time, the tribes began to see the love and care we had for them. They saw that we weren't there to take anything from them, but rather to offer them hope and peace." He went on to explain how the tribes had seen the transforming power of Jesus in the lives of the team members, and how that had sparked their own curiosity. They began to ask more questions about Jesus, and the team was able to share more of the gospel with them. The turning point was when the tribes saw the love of Jesus in action, John said. They saw how he had transformed our lives, and they wanted that same transformation for themselves. As the conversation continued, John saw a transformation happening in the person next to him. Their eyes began to light up with hope and they began to see the love of Christ in a new way. Their face slowly softened, like a flower opening up to the sun after a long winter. The tears in their eyes were like the gentle rain, bringing life and renewal to a parched land. And as the plane touched down, the person turned to him, their eyes bright with a newfound hope, like a shooting star cutting through the darkness of the night sky. John smiled, feeling a deep sense of peace, like a clear blue sky after a thunderstorm. He knew that the journey had been like a treacherous mountain climb. But he also knew that God's hand had been on him every step of the way, like a guiding star through the darkest of nights. He whispered a prayer of thanksgiving, knowing that his own life would never be the same. As the plane touched down in Australia, he gathered his things and made his way off the plane. Finally, John reached home. The sun had set, and the world was all fast disappearing to twilight. He walked to the once familiar door, now made unfamiliar by time, carrying one large bag, and inserted the key into the lock. The door creaked as he pushed it open, and he stepped inside, taking in the sight of his empty home. The air was musty. He saw a thin layer of dust on the floor and furniture. He hesitated for a moment, feeling a pang of sadness at the sight of his home. He took a deep breath and walked into the living room, looking around at the empty chairs and the curtains drawn tight. John walked to the kitchen and opened the fridge, finding a carton of sour milk inside. He grimaced and quickly shut the door, feeling a wave of disappointment wash over him. He sighed and made his way to the bedroom, feeling a sense of trepidation as he opened the door. The room was dark, and he fumbled for the light switch, turning it on. The bulb flickered once and then went out, leaving him in darkness. John let out a frustrated groan and walked over to the window, pulling back the curtains and letting in a sliver of light. He could see dust floating in the air, and he realized how long it had been since anyone had lived in the house. He took a deep breath and walked out of the room, heading to the study to unpack some of his things. As he walked, He thought of the jungle and the people he had met there, feeling a sense of longing for the simple, uncluttered life he had left behind. John sighed as he rummaged through the empty cupboards of his dusty and silent home. The only thing he could find was a box of pasta and a tin of tomatoes. He heated up some water on the stove and cooked the pasta, the sound of the bubbling water echoing throughout the empty house. Once the pasta was cooked, he drained it and opened the tin of tomatoes. Pouring the contents into a saucepan, he heated it up, adding salt and pepper to taste. As the sauce simmered, John took a moment to look around the room. Dust cloaked the furniture, and drawn curtains dimmed and gloomed the room. He dished out the pasta onto a plate and added the tomato sauce. Sitting down at the table, he ate his meager dinner, now unappetizing after fresh tribal foods and feasts. Despite this, John was grateful for the sustenance. As he finished his meal, John felt the weight of the empty house pressing down on him. But he remembered the reason he had come back to bring the light of Jesus to the Australian people he had once left behind. John put down the empty plate and sat at the table for a moment, his mind racing with thoughts of what he needed to do next. He had decided to call his church pastor to let him know he was back and discuss his next steps. He picked up the phone and dialed the number, listening as it rang on the other end. Finally, he heard a click in his pastor's voice on the line. "Hey John, it's great to hear from you. How was your trip?" the pastor asked. "It was good, but I'm back now," John replied. "I'm ready to start working again and share the gospel with the people here." The pastor's tone changed and became apologetic. "I'm so sorry, John. I'm with my family right now and can't talk for long. But we're glad you're back and we'll pray for you." John's hunger for company gnawed at him all the harder now. "Thanks, Pastor. I appreciate your support." John paused. Then, "Talk later." He hung up the phone and sat there for a moment, the silence of the empty house pressing in on him once again like that which he never wanted to know again. He knew that he had a lot of work to do, but he also knew that he couldn't do it alone. John headed to his room to rest. Closing his eyes, he whispered a prayer for strength and guidance, knowing that he would need it in the days to come. He missed praying with his team. John lay in bed, staring up at the ceiling as he listened to the sounds of the night. So different from the jungle. The odd car rumble. The missing animal noises. The emptiness of suburban life. He tossed and turned, unable to sleep. His mind raced with thoughts of the past, present, and future. Did I make a mistake coming back here? He missed the company of his team members and the village life that had become so familiar to him. The house felt so lonely. In his memory he could still hear an echo of the laughter and chatter of the tribal people, and the sense of community they had built together. But now, the silence of the empty house surrounded him, making him feel more alone than ever. He turned on his side, pulling the blanket closer around him as he tried to block out the emptiness. Have I made a mistake leaving the jungle? He really missed the company of his team, and the simple village life that had become his home. It all felt so very lonely here in the unbearable suburban quiet. He even longed for the growls of wild jungle animals threatening in the night. John tried to busy himself during the day, but the emptiness of the house had become unbearable at night. Have I left something more important behind? Have I abandoned the people who needed me? Again, regret washed over him like the flash floods of the monsoon rains. He had always known that following God's calling would not be easy, but he had not anticipated this loneliness. But even as he struggled with his doubts and fears, he knew that he could not give up. John closed his eyes and whispered a prayer, asking for strength and guidance in the days to come. As nights wore on, John finally drifted off to sleep, his dreams filled with memories of the 1040 window. I need to fill the void. John woke up every morning, feeling slightly better than he had each night before. On one particular morning, this one, John stretched and got out of bed, making his way to the living room. He sat down on the couch and picked up his Bible, lazily flipping it to a random page. His eyes fell on a verse that seemed to speak directly to him. "The Lord himself goes before you and will be with you. He will never leave you nor forsake you. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged." Deuteronomy 31 verse 8. John read the verse over and over again. It was as if the brightness of heaven had entered the room. He knew without a shadow that he wasn't alone, for even God's shadow felt brighter than the spotted sunlight. He knew God was with him in that moment, and would be every step of the way. With renewed energy, John got up from the couch and started his day, ready to face whatever challenge lay ahead.